Mhm. Awesome. Awesome. Yes, I am too, and glad that you're going to be part of. Oh, no worries. All right, so we'll probably connect. I'm hoping it's going to be in the next week, but it could be 2 weeks before I get the okay, and then I'll reach out to you and let you know kind of what the next steps are. Awesome. Okay. Talk to you soon then, Mike. All right, bye-bye.
Hello, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. You may notice that I am not Rory Adam. I'm using his account today. I'm getting us started. We'll just let a few more people join. And if you could, just as a housekeeping, make sure to keep your camera and computer muted when you're not talking. All right, it's 3 o'clock and we'll go ahead and get started. I would like to introduce all of you to Faith Wright. If you don't know Faith, she is the Maddie's Shelter Management Advisor for American Pets Alive. She's incredible, as all our instructors are, and she's gonna kick us off today and get the conversation started. Take it away, Faith.
Okay, first and foremost, sorry, but I just got home and I have 5 bottle baby puppies that need to be fed. So I'm gonna be like kind of somewhat distracted and just moving around a little bit, so sorry. But they're super cute little Catahoula puppies whose mommy just died. So they're super amazing. But yeah, so welcome everybody for being here, or thank you for being here. We're super excited to have you with us on a Friday afternoon. We know it can get tiring by the end of the week. We wanted to spend today talking about stray dogs, stray cats, loose cats, and any other hot topic item that you guys might want to talk about. I also want to invite the other instructors on the call to introduce themselves. I know we've got Jordana, Monica, and Cassandra, and it looks like even Sarah is still here, so a baby has not happened yet. So if everybody would like to just give a 2-minute, or 30-second, whatever, quick synopsis about yourself and what you do, in case we have anybody new on the phone, that'd be great.
Go first. Hi, everyone. I am Jordana Murby. I am the Maddie's Medical Program Advisor for American Pets Alive, former clinic manager for Austin Pets Alive.
Hey everybody, Monica Friendon. I am the Maddie's Director of Feline Lifesaving at Austin Pets Alive.
Hi, I'm Cassandra Mincing. I am Maddie's Neonatal Director, and I was the Neonatal Nursery Manager for Austin Pets Alive for since 2011.
I'll go ahead
Sarah,
and
do you want to introduce yourself?
well. I'll go ahead and introduce myself and then Sarah can go. I'm Casey Spain.
Okay.
I'm the marketing and PR manager for American Pets Alive. Sarah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm the marketing communications assistant for American Pets Alive.
And just one other quick housekeeping thing. We will also be putting a form in the chat for you to fill out if you joined today. Sarah went ahead and put that in there. If you could just take a minute to fill that out so that we know that you're here and we've got your information. So thank you on that.
So I think let's go ahead and
ahead.
kick this off with the big elephant in the room. What's going on at your shelter and what are you seeing in your community as the hot topic of this week related to, possibly related to stray animals? Anyone? Nobody's community's having any issues? Are we all living in the perfect community?
Can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Glenn Andrews. I'm calling from Memphis Animal Services. And one of the biggest things that we're having is we're still getting the usual call-ins for the random stray dogs, and we're basically trying to work around the new norm for us, which is keeping our population low. So we're trying to figure out how we utilize our resources in the community so that we could rehome these animals instead of bringing them into the shelter system. It's been a huge undertaking, and we're finding that there are a lot of different techniques that need to be used in order to be successful with this. Because it's so new, we don't really have anything that we could quantify or even write down at this point. And we're all just in an experimental phase. So our biggest thing now is that we have all of these stray dog calls, and we're being told that we have to not just identify them as strays, but really try to figure out which ones are actual owned animals, and we're doing that over the phone. So it's caused some difficulties for us, but I think that that's our biggest problem right now.
Are you having, has the community been really open to being like finder to foster or anything like that? Or are you hitting backlash with that as well?
Actually, I think that all of the experiments that we've tried have been very successful. We've been able to provide them with a lot of different resources to advocate for, or to tell people that they have these animals. And we have websites, we have phone numbers that they can call, and it's just about providing that to them. And as long as we're doing that and we give them that sense of familiarity, they seem to be okay with it. I find that I'm getting most of my success is coming from that direct contact and letting them know that they have just one person to talk to. So I haven't really gotten a lot of pushback, but there are some people that are like, this dog is just tearing up my yard, and I want the dog removed. And you're telling me that because it's not aggressive or it's not injured that you can't pick it up. And I'm a taxpayer, just the normal things that any citizen would say. And like I said, it's difficult telling them that because it's not aggressive, it doesn't meet our criteria at this time for removal. So it's been up and down. It's been back and forth, experimental. I can't even give you statistics on it at this point. There are just so many people that are for it, so many people that are against it.
One thing that we have been talking about with some of the pilot project shelters is creating what's called a foster on deck program. So if that person in your community is saying, there's just no way I'm going to keep this animal, it's tearing up my backyard. Okay, thank you for everything you did. I'm going to connect you with a foster person that you can transfer the animal over to. And you have a foster on deck already. So you've got a group of fosters that have said, I only want to foster for animals that might be able to get returned to their owner. I don't want to be like, a 3-month-long medical foster, bottle babies, anything like that. I just want to do this level of it. And then you can connect them directly and they can transfer, or if they're not comfortable meeting each other, they could come to the shelter and your person's ready to pick up, almost immediately, so it doesn't really enter into your shelter system or cause a clog in your shelter. So that is one thing that's going to be, we'll have a couple of webinars going on about foster on deck very soon.
Another thing that might be helpful in addition to foster on deck is naming your new shelter capacity. So we know that some dogs are still going to be coming into the shelter, but if we can say, okay, per COVID guidelines, we're at 25% capacity in our shelter kennels, and when we hit 25% of our kennels being full, the shelter is full, and so we have to get them out. So if you name your capacity, then you can tell people when they find a stray. We have 2 kennels open right now, and I have 4 dogs that are on call. when we have space, we can come and pick up that dog. And that might help give them some sort of comfort knowing that something may happen, something's going to happen, but it's not going to happen probably today, may not happen tomorrow. But as you have space and you need 25% capacity, whatever number that is, then you can maybe start making some of those pickups. But that also means that dogs and cats have to continue to leave the shelter. So you've basically just shrunk big time.
Well, we've been doing that, and our team has really worked well with this. We actually set up a structure where we have a new capacity, and that number is given to us every morning by our shelter supervisors. Because I'm the field supervisor, I get that number every morning. That allows me the ability to know what we can take in and what we can't, based off of where we're at with the numbers. The thing I think that one of my biggest obstacles with that is the program is constant, but it's very fluid. You know, from day to day, based off of those numbers, I'm going to approach my calls differently. You know, and so that's where it's difficult for us because there's no consistency there with my team. You know, there are certain mornings where I have to tell them from the beginning of the morning, hey, you know, my officers, I tell them, listen, you have to scrutinize all the calls. We cannot bring anything in unless it meets that criteria. And then there are some mornings where I can tell them, hey guys, you know, 5 is our limit. You know, if you see something out there that, you know, you think that you need to get, it just needs some help, doesn't fit the criteria, we can kind of, you know, just bypass what the criteria is. But it's never going to be the same from day to day. And I think that that's our obstacle, just the fact that there's no consistency with that.
Yeah, for sure. And it also sounds like it's you're also retraining your officers essentially and
Yes.
reprogramming them. So it's hopefully it's going to be really challenging now and in the next few months while you're reprogramming them. But in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 months, however long, you're not even going to have those conversations with them anymore because they're going to know that they have to scrutinize each call and they have to do their due diligence on trying to find the owner of those animals.
Right.
I have a valuable point about having to retrain officers. Right now, so many, and we all know this at every shelter, our officers are thought of as somebody that needs to come in and deal with whatever we don't want to deal with ourselves. And our officers think that is what their role is. And so we now have to stop and retrain all of our officers to understand that they too are part of the solution by becoming part of the community and having just that discussion in the communities as well with, oh, okay, it's tearing up the backyard. Is it because you're leaving it outside all the time? Or can we put it in a crate? Can we loan you a crate? Things like that, that we have to just retrain our staff to do where they're not used to having to do that.
Right. I mean, we're sending our officers with food and phone numbers, and sometimes we have kennels on the truck with them. I mean, we're prepared to offer anything that they need. But one thing that's really the major component of this is these animals don't start off as these people's dogs, you know, like they're strays. And when they're complaining that the dog is like messing up their yard, they're not saying that it's doing it because they've attempted to contain them. They're saying that this is the problem. This is the reason why they're calling us. This is the reason why they want this animal removed. And it's very difficult after the animal has, I guess, you know, damaged their property to convince them that, hey, hold on, you know, have you spoke to anyone else? And then you have people who are naturally introverted and they don't want to talk to other people, you know, they don't want to speak to their neighbors. They've never spoke to them in the 5 years that they've lived there. I think that that's a minority, and I don't think that anything needs to be based off of that group, that small group of people. So I'm still very excited about what we're doing now, and I love the fact that we are retraining our officers because it's making them smarter. They're starting to understand more. It inadvertently teaches them more about animal behavior, people behavior, and it gets them accustomed to all of the resources that we are offering, and it does put them in a community in a way that they've never been in before.
Agreed. Is anybody else seeing problems like this in their community?
It looks like Emily wants to say something. Go ahead, Emily.
I think I have some.
Yeah, I think it's a similar vein of the staff training and really like psychologically accepting the new normal is a big challenge. And I've seen it with other changes we've had in the industry as well, like any support intervention that when staff would prefer to take the animal in and leave the animal with the person and go have that challenging conversation and give the resources, or even open adoptions. Those are challenging things. And it's very easy for us to slip back to the easy answer or the known answer that we're the animal shelter, we should take the animal in. And so I'm seeing that a lot, balancing. We have all these fosters on deck right now where I am in Los Angeles, because everybody is working from home, and we have this big list of people who are really insistent on wanting to foster. But I know that the right answer for a stray dog is to have that hard conversation with the finder and ask them to shelter that animal within the community it was found in. But that gets exhausting for staff to know that there's an easy known answer that they've had in the past that maybe doesn't have the right outcome, the outcome that we want, that is sending the animal home, but it's the buy-in that is the right outcome for the decision making that they're having to do. And it makes that conversation up front so much harder, but our work in the long term easier. That's just very hard to remember in the moment.
That's what I was going to point out, that if we could have that conversation with, yes, it's hard to have, that can you foster it over and over and over conversation. But the reality is, while they're having to have that conversation, it's still easier than having to clean that kennel, care for that animal, walk that animal, provide food for that animal, provide medication for that animal when it ultimately gets sick in the shelter, do the paperwork for return to owner, do the paperwork for the adoption, the transfer, whatever. The savings to their time is huge. And it's hard to see that when you're just kind of stuck in the trenches of, but I have to talk to the person. Because as we, unfortunately know, a lot of animal care people don't really like to have to talk to people. It's just kind of, we care about the animals, and we have to start caring about the animals and the humans and keeping that human and animal connection together.
And I've ended up having a conversation a lot with front desk staff and with officers that this wasn't the they thought they were getting into. Like, officers were used to responding to a call, picking up the dog, bringing it to the shelter, and dropping them off. And that most of their job duties have really shifted to these challenging conversations. There's some resistance there because they are challenging. Like, I understand this is really hard. These are hard conversations. And it reduces the workload overall for the shelter, but it makes their individual workloads seem more challenging because these are new tasks too. Doing new tasks and more in depth are really challenging.
Yeah, and it's hard to learn something new and be doing it at the same time. So I totally get that. I do feel like at the end of the day, people are going to have to decide whether if your shelter is making changes, whether they're on board with those changes or not. And there's absolutely a painful learning curve that we're all going through. But I do think each person is going to have to make that decision. Is this something that I want to continue doing? Is this a position that I didn't really sign up for? I don't want to do it, and find something that they do want to do. But that's going to have to happen at all levels. I think from executive directors to animal control officers to our receptionists, the front desk people that are actually having to have those conversations. So I don't think it's realistic to expect every staff person to be on board. But if we want to make these changes, then, people are going to have to start learning how to change and how to make those conversations a little bit more comfortable or not. I mean, I don't mean that to sound cruel or anything, because I totally get it. It's a tough position for them to be in.
Couple of quick things. So I just put a blog that we put out this morning in the chat. I don't know if any of you saw that or happened to be on the call this morning. with Kristen Auerbach, but that blog, I'm not just saying this because I'm the marketing person. I think it's really great information. And I would highly recommend reading it and sharing it with your staff as well, so that they can start kind of reframing their mindset on those things. And also think about the things within that blog, and if there's ways that you can break down that messaging and share it through your social media channels and with your community and emails, as announcements, that sort of thing, being very transparent with your community on what you're trying to do, that you know that this is something that you're going to have to work on. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so how do you constantly communicate with your community, telling them we're looking at animal sheltering completely differently now. We were in this great place when COVID hit, where we had a lot of fosters come on, or maybe you didn't. And what does that look like? And then telling that story all along. Say, we're not great at this right now, but we're working on it. We need your support. Using it as a way to recruit new volunteers, using it as a way to recruit fresh perspective, and get your staff and community on board. Because if the staff isn't on board, the community won't be. They represent your community in such a big way. If you're getting anger from your staff, your community is going to be upset. So think about it like that. There's a great question from Susan in here. What resources and encouragement do you provide to the finders to get the lost dog home? How is the return to owner facilitated if the dog is in a foster home?
So it really depends on what your shelter has set up. I know that City of El Paso, what they're doing is they are assigning them an animal number so that the shelter has identification on who the animal is. And they go ahead and put the finder to foster in as literally a finder to foster. They've started that up as a designation in Pet Point. And then they post it on their website. They have a lost and found website. And then they coordinate with the finder and the owner when the transfer is handled back. I know another shelter, or Austin Animal Center even, they take the lost report or the found report, they give them an animal number and they post them on their found website for 14 days. And they're just kind of the facilitator, where I call and I say, I see my animal on that page. And then they connect me with the person that found my animal, and I go pick up my animal from the finder, and I let them know I've got my dog back.
Pima Animal Care in Tucson also has volunteers going through their lost reports and their found reports. And it's just people combing that data, trying to make those matches and connect the people.
Minneapolis has the same thing, Animal Humane in Minneapolis, and they've got an 84% return to owner rate with dogs, because they've got volunteers just sitting at home scouring the lost and found pages. And then they also have a call center where people can call in. But that's all their volunteers are doing right now, is just combing through the pages that they have.
I don't think what was the rest of that question, Casey?
It says, how is the return to owner facilitated if the dog is in a foster home? And then what resources do we provide the finders to get the lost dogs home? We talked to them about posting on Nextdoor, on Facebook, on Craigslist, hanging up folders, any of those kind of things. We talked to them about that kind of stuff. And then of course, if they need food, leashes, collars, anything like that, we give that to the finder.
Yeah, it's a good idea to keep reaching out to a community for donations, if it's kennels, bedding, food, leashes, because then you can send those out to those fosters. And you're not paying for it out of pocket, which you shouldn't do.
Is anybody having any issues with dogs that you don't really have a good sense of their behavior, causing any problems in the finder homes?
I mean, I do think that we've got some of those situations, and that's why the shelters are still there. So if we do have an animal that the person doesn't feel safe handling in their house, or they can't handle it in their house, it can still go to the shelter. The shelters aren't saying, don't bring us anything. They're saying we want to take it in on an emergency basis. And obviously a dog that's showing really negative and aggressive behavior in a home, that's an emergency.
Yeah, no, I get that. I just, we frequently have dogs that, are kind of, they're not showing something until they are. So I'm just wondering, because we weren't really fostering too many dogs out until, you know, March, mid-March, early April. And so it's kind of a new program again here, but, you know, we have our share, like all municipalities have our share of dogs whose, you know, temperaments might not be ideal and have some behavior issues that sometimes get exacerbated in the shelter, but sometimes it's just, you know, just something, you know, dog reactivity or something like that. And if, you know, if it can happen here at the shelter, it would seem like it could happen in those homes too. So some of my staff has concerns about those things happening in a home setting.
I mean, I definitely understand that, and I get that. I think if we think about it though, even if an animal comes into the shelter and acts perfectly angelic at the shelter and gets adopted and goes home, we can't predict for you know, long term if that animal's not going to have a problem when it gets in the home. It could start wanting to guard the bathroom. It could start wanting to guard a person, a fireplace. I mean, anything. So I don't think that we're asking them to take any bigger risk than we're asking for an adopter to take from an animal that might have been at the shelter that we don't see their behavior accurately necessarily either. I mean, I'm quite honestly, I just got off of a conversation where a dog that I fostered 2 years ago is not safe and he's not going to be able to continue. But he was in a home for 2 years and showed fine until he didn't. And so it's, you know, it's been 2 years and now all of a sudden there's some really significant unsafe situations going on. So we just don't know.
I think, Chris, from my perspective, we were having a hard time getting especially large dogs into foster. And there was a lot of concern. We have a large behavior team, which is great and can be a problem. But they were very concerned about behaviors that they were seeing being unhandleable in a foster home, and that we would find both a foster home to handle those behaviors and then also have to do the work of finding an adopter to handle those behaviors. Having to move to an emergency where all those animals are in foster homes no matter what, we're not seeing the number of concerning behaviors that we were previously, because a lot of them are shelter specific. And we also have a behavior helpline, which people out of the area are welcome to use. It's on our website, pasadenahumane.org. But there are lots of shelters that offer that, and so that's always a resource for the community. So if they're seeing something that's more specific to their home, we could talk them through that more in the moment. And I've seen very few behaviors that are scary in the real world. But probably there are dogs that wouldn't have left the shelter alive because of the stress of the shelter. Inciting behaviors that we would then pathologize and think we're unsafe.
That's good to know. I'm pretty sure you deal with a few more dogs than we do here in Rochester, New York too. So thank you.
Does anybody have any successes? Anything that's really worked for them that you'd like to share?
We might be the odd duck here. We actually have not.
Don't make us start calling on names on the screens that we see.
Hi, Erica, I think you're talking, but we can't hear you. The sound is just really, really quiet.
Let me see if that helps. Is that better?
It's a little bit better, but you might get like a little closer to your computer or something.
How's that?
That's better. That's better. Go ahead.
So we might be the odd duck because we never stopped taking in healthy stray dogs. We always continued that because we felt like, at least in our community, the backlash on social media would be far worse than accepting a dog here or there. And we got very lucky. We weren't taking in that many, maybe a dog a day initially. But the good news is that we had an excellent reclaim rate for that first couple months. Now that things have started opening up in Florida, and even though we are on the way uptick, if you're watching Corona, we have seen that less and less people are reclaiming their dogs. We might be finding the owners, no problem, but they're just not reclaiming. They're just not reaching back out to us for whatever reason. We might have a chip that goes to somebody and we're just not getting them in the door. And oftentimes we don't know why. But I will say that the issue becomes, are these people that always intended to not reclaim their animal, and this is a way for getting the animal into the shelter because we've been closed for owner surrenders? And so it sort of begs the question, when our animal control officer, you know, scans a dog in the field, gets hold of the owner, and the owner's like, so how did you find me? And how did you find my dog? And they don't really want to reclaim, but our officer's going to drive it back home, and then suddenly it's loose again, you know, a couple days later, because they totally forgot they had a chip in the dog and that it registered back to them. So I think we definitely struggle with, are we just holding onto these dogs for 6 days that we would otherwise get a surrender on and be able to move through the process quicker? And how do we incorporate owner surrenders back into the scheme of things? Our rates are about 75% of our intakes for dogs are strays, believe it or not. And we don't have that many owner surrenders overall.
So one thing that we are really wanting to push for owner surrenders is more of a rehoming effort on their own. So they go home to home, they go rehome through Adopt a Pet, things like that. That way the shelter can be the advocate for them and help connect them and help walk them through the process, but doesn't have to be the one that brings them in. And so even if you find that person that says, oh, how did you find out it was mine? You can have that conversation with them. Oh, so you probably don't want to keep your animal. Have you thought about rehoming? And this is what rehoming can look like. And just start that discussion right then, so that you're not getting that same dog, you're right, back over and over, or that owner bringing it in 3 days and saying, oh, I found it, it's a stray. I had to work in front of Austin Animal Center for 2 months during a distemper outbreak. And I don't know how many people brought me a dog and told me it was a stray. And they would walk off and the dog is howling and crying and trying to follow after them. And, you know, I'm like, this is not a stray, this is your dog. But because they were so full, they were on appointment only for intake, and it was, you know, spaced way long out, that they were just bringing them in as strays. But I think if we could have that conversation up front, you know, we can give you an appointment, but it's going to be 3 weeks out. But have you tried home to home? Have you tried rehome? Have you tried any of these other avenues to just place the dog yourself? A lot of times they don't know that these things are out there. All they know is Craigslist. And if I put it on Craigslist, it could go to a dog fight, or it could be eaten. You know, there's all the weird things that everybody hears about, the negatives. And so if we could have that positive communication with them about trying the different platforms, we might see an even farther reduction in owner surrenders.
And I think we have toyed with that to a certain degree. We're sort of in a lull in being able to get home to home because of our city regulations and being able to sign up for that. But Adopt a Pet isn't really well marketed in our community. But I feel like we were able to encourage a lot of people to go to Facebook and rehome. But now that there's so much social media shaming, people don't want to put it out there that they've failed this particular animal and they're looking to rehome it. And so it's really difficult to encourage people to do that, because most people just want to be done with the animal and they don't want to actually have to tell their friends, family, neighbors, and everybody and put it all out there that this isn't working out for them. And we do have a lot of people that want to surrender to us that have adopted from other shelters, other rescues, from Craigslist, from Facebook already. So that makes up a good portion of the people that are already looking to rehome.
Yeah, I definitely understand the fear of the shaming and everything. We run a Austin Pets Alive positive alternative shelter surrender page. And our person that runs it has to be super careful, and she's constantly having to watch and make sure that people aren't shaming the people that have reached out for help to rehome, so that they don't take it to the shelter. I help her man that page and have to watch the comments, and we have to turn off commenting sometimes and stuff like that. It does get hard.
I would like to bring up a successful program. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm Susan Tanian with Lost Dogs Illinois, and we have a partnership with the City of Chicago Animal Control, and we have a group of volunteers who research our dead-end chips, and we've had a 66% success rate, and that doesn't really, I mean, it includes the dogs getting back to the owners, but it also, our head of the microchip hunters, as we call them, is on the conference call. She has a real way with people sometimes who sit there and say that they really don't want to come in and get their dog. but she gets them to do a surrender form. So the dog doesn't have to be there for the 7 days, because we have a 3-day stray hold without chips and our ID, or a 7-day hold if they have a chip. So she's able to move those dogs into the program, and we have a really good relationship with them. And like I said, I'm really proud of the fact that it's a 66% success rate. And these volunteers, it isn't just an hour, it's almost a full-time job for them finding these owners of lost dogs. We just had one that was 9 years. They never thought their dog was, and she—
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, she contacted relatives on the Facebook page. She's even in the past gotten a hold of people in Japan and other countries trying to locate an owner.
Yeah, that's definitely a full
everywhere.
Yeah, that's definitely a full-time job, but that work is, 66% return to owner is huge.
Well, it's a success rate in finding the
Success
owner.
rate, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's big. That's big. But yeah, the time that it takes to do that is, I don't know a lot of staff people that have that time, but volunteers, or finding a group of volunteers, or an organization that can do it is fantastic.
Kim, you're lit up like you want to talk. Are you trying to talk?
No, I didn't realize I wasn't on mute. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe you had something amazing to add.
Anybody else? Marilyn, do you have any successes?
Well, I do the same work that Susan's talking about. And I was just going to say that our volunteer group, we're available to work with any shelters that would like to work with us. For example, Chicago, we work with them on an ad hoc basis. San Antonio felt more comfortable with a contract. The city council actually approved a no-fee contract that they renew every couple of years. So, and then some shelters just send me an email and say, hey, I found this dog, can you help? So if anybody's interested, it's at microchiphelp.com, and we're happy to work with anyone and provide volunteers or train your staff or do whatever whatever you're comfortable with. We just recognize that there's a real problem with microchips not going back to the people easily, but it's not an insoluble problem. And we find that if our volunteers throw a lot of hours and expertise at it, that we can sometimes find owners who really want to take the animals back, and that's our goal.
That's great. Do you have some information that you could put in the chat for everyone?
I put the website in there. It looks like Susan said that you guys also include vet clinics, police department, etc.
We'll help individuals or organizations. I would say it's primarily we're working with shelters and with people who find animals, who are seeing on Facebook, somebody will say, oh, fill out this form. And we have forms on microchiphelp.com that, for example, the shelter form has real shorthand to it because you don't have to put your address in every time, whereas an individual needs to put their address in. And they also give us permission to disclose their information to the owner. So we are following the same rules as the microchip companies, and I have agreements, we have agreements with the main microchip companies. They disclose to us. We, of course, don't disclose to anyone other than a shelter, that kind of private information.
So I do think as we move into the new world of sheltering, we're going to need to think about what a shelter is. So I personally feel like a volunteer for a shelter is an extension of the shelter. And so if I have volunteers calling on chips, my volunteers need to be able to be given that information so that I don't have to tie up my key staff members that might be running my call center or doing something else. I can have a volunteer team. And we did talk to Pet Health, and they said that they did approve that they would be able to give information out to volunteers for a shelter as well. So that'd be awesome if you guys were able to do that too.
We consider anybody who's working with the shelter to be an extension of that shelter. I mean, we're not checking people's credentials in that respect.
Awesome. Awesome. Pet health used to really, like, you had to have a title and an email from the city and, you know, that kind of stuff. And they've agreed to back off of that, knowing that that's just not going to be the practical way to go forward with everything that we want to have changed.
I have a question. So who has, what shelters, and you can talk about this or you can use the little reactions at the bottom. What shelters have engaged, especially municipal shelters, have engaged either a Friends of group or another rescue in your community or something along those lines to do some things that your shelter does not allow you to do? So like I was just chatting with Erica and she was saying that her shelter, and I've heard this before, this is really common, the shelter doesn't allow, because it's a municipal organization, doesn't allow volunteers to post on their Facebook. So they can't help with things like that, like having alternatives, like our past program that we have at Austin Pets Alive is not something that's allowed because we're a nonprofit, not a municipal shelter. So, but I know that there is behavior programs that can be resources. There's all kinds of resources that other groups outside of your city shelter want to help with. Which ones of you have done that, and what have been some that you have successful relationships with?
We've been doing things way before the coronavirus hit us. And I think one great thing that we had was our surrender prevention program, our own surrender prevention program. And what that is we were able to get some donations that went to its own separate account. And those donations were allocated to just 2 separate clinics. So we get animals in that we could not care for because this is a municipal shelter as well, where this is Memphis Animal Services. And we are able to divert those people to those clinics, and we use those donations to help them with the medical cost. Of course, we have a limit, but I have, with every single person that I've spoken to, that I've diverted there, have become patients of those clinics, which makes them happy. And it allows them to keep their pets. And it also allows us to ensure that those animals are vaccinated and spayed and neutered, which is a big thing for us. I mean, we actually have an ordinance about spay and neuter here. So that's one thing that's one way we've been very successful. That's been a very successful thing for us. So happy that we've implicated that. And my boss is, she looks at all shelters and all national practices, and she takes what she hears is going to work. So all of my officers have microchip scanners on their trucks. They all have phone numbers to call. We have people here at the shelter that they'll call and have them research microchips for them so they can return those animals in the field, which we're thinking is the future for us. If we are, and again, but this is pre-corona. We're trying to get people to just get their animals back before we even make it to the shelter. Now, of course, we may give them a summons if the dog was at large or not in compliance, but it allows us to skip that shelter, get them in compliance, and then we find that we don't have issues with those people anymore so far.
Glenn, do you know on average, or just off the top of your head, how much funding you get for those clinic budgets and how much you allocate to people and how many people you can help with that money?
We actually have someone who takes care of those numbers themselves. My boss created a position just for that, for someone to run that program. But I know I've been given the directive that I am to try to stay within the $250 price range for medical services. And if it does exceed that, I find that we're able to do that, but it all depends on what the situation is. After $250, that's the red flag, and then I have to move it up to get that approval.
Gotcha.
So at $250 and under, I'm able to just say, go ahead with it. Go ahead with those services. So
okay, awesome, thank you.
So Susan is asking some really good questions about having the, how does the animal get back to the owner? What do you do if the owner doesn't have vehicle transportation? And then what do you do about redemption fees if the animal is in the finder foster? Does anybody have thoughts on any of that?
We transport.
That's what I was going to say. I know several shelters that are like, we'll take them.
We will take those animals as long as they're, we try to stay within Memphis, but there are some places in Shelby County that are not too far from the city, and we travel there. We travel anywhere that's in Shelby County to drop these animals back off and take them back home. That's never going to be a problem. That is not going to be an obstacle that stops us from getting these animals back to their home and with their owners. So we will put them back on the truck and take them where they have to go. And if it's about fees, I think my boss made a very good point a long time ago. It's going to cost more money for us to hold on to the dogs and administer those services and feed them and run those play groups and so on and so forth. All the energy that goes into it doesn't matter. We can just waive that little bit of money and get the dog back to the people, and it saves us more in the long run.
Definitely. Another question that came up, Emily brought it up about legislative issues on, and we're dealing with this in Texas right now, and specifically Austin, Emily. I'm on a committee trying to resolve it, and we're not making very good headway. If you bring an animal into the shelter, there's a 72-hour stray hold, boom, done. If I'm a finder to foster and I keep it, it's not 72 hours right now. In Austin, it's 14 days, but they're now wanting to say it should be 30 days minimum. And so I don't see how we're going to get finders to become finder to fosters when we're putting those kind of obstacles in there. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. 72 hours, boom, it's done, but I have to hold on to it for 30 days. I'm sorry. I mean, I don't even think I could do that. I mean, that's just a lot of days. So we are definitely dealing with that. And it comes to, Texas and California, for specifically are the two I know of that consider dogs as property. And so then we're going through property right disputes and not being able to give away people's property. However, the shelter can at 72 hours. So it's a little odd, like we have to get them to change their mindset that as long as we're still posting it everywhere like we would be, it should get to be the same stray hold. And we're running into, and it's not that Texas doesn't allow it, it's silent on it. And so it's shelter to shelter to shelter that gets to make that decision. And so right now, this is Austin's position for that.
So Faith, wouldn't the El Paso solution help there? If the animal actually gets put into the system and then sent back home, it's in your system. The person is loosely connected with you as a foster.
I totally agree with you. So in Austin, they do assign it an animal number, and it is posted on the webpage as a found animal even. And they only keep it there for 14 days. But the finder has to hold on to it for 14 days before they can rehome it or transfer it to a rescue or anything like that.
But the 14
Even though it's
days
on their website and in their system, like all that stuff.
Where's the 14 days written besides on that Austin Pets Alive paperwork? Because I saw that and it gave me pause because I didn't want to type it for Rochester.
It's Austin Animal Center just decided it. Austin Pets Alive didn't decide it. We actually feel like the 72 hours is what is there. That's what legally is required in a shelter. And if I'm hanging on to the animal for the shelter, I'm just an extension of the shelter. I mean, technically speaking, if the shelter flooded tomorrow and we had to put the animals in homes, we probably would give it a little bit more time just because we know people are also dealing with internet outages, stuff like that. Right. But I'm an extension of the shelter, so I shouldn't have to do anything different than what the shelter is having to do.
No, I agree.
As long as I filed a found report. I mean, Las Cruces, New Mexico has the best ordinance out there because it specifically says you must file a found report within 24 hours. You must submit to allowing animal control to pick up that animal at their request. But that after 72 hours, if a lost report has not been found, you can rehome that animal or claim it as your own now. So they're very specific in Las Cruces in their ordinance.
I know in New York, we have a, sorry, Glenn, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm pretty sure every shelter posts their animals online when they have them in their facility. So we found a way to have our animals posted online, and even when they're in foster care, they're still posted. that definitely gives us the ability to utilize that, to say that that stray wait time has been utilized before we're transferring ownership.
I agree 100%. I agree.
Sorry, man, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in New York, I know that there's a separate statute that applies to animals that are left behind at a vet hospital, and the vet clinic has to hold the animal for 30 days, and it sounds like somehow something along those lines is being confused or convoluted in what's happening there with this 14 days, unless there's something else that I'm missing, but.
It literally is just coming down to different people having different philosophies on property rights and animal sheltering timelines, unfortunately, because Texas is silent on it in their statute. So it gets to get interpreted in the different many ways that people want to interpret it. So basically, like, the way around it, or the way to fix it, would be to get state legislatures to discuss where stray hold can be performed at. It can be performed in a finder to foster or in the shelter, and it's 72 hours. I mean, if the statutes could say that, then we would be covered. We'd be done. Problem solved, discussion ended, and everybody just has to hold for 72 hours and keep going.
Sometimes you can get an opinion from from the state without them having to change the statute. So especially if the law is silent on it, maybe you can get their legal counsel. Do you have a federation that you're part of for the state?
It's the Attorney General that we'd have to get the response from.
Okay.
The opinion. It would be Attorney General opinion.
Do you have a federation, though, that you work with for Texas that helps with legislative initiatives?
We have Texas Pets Alive that we could definitely see if they could help a little bit. Who else has something successful working? I liked that Jordana spun it to successful instead of negative. So who else has something successful to talk about? Come on.
Hey guys, this is Alexis. I'm the director in Memphis, so Glenn mentioned me a couple times. But a lot of what Glenn said obviously falls under the bigger umbrella of while we may know it works to keep pets in their neighborhoods and not bring them to the shelter, how do you convince other people around you, key stakeholders, whether that be your city leadership, whether that be your rescue community, your volunteers, your board, whatever that looks like. So that's been one of the areas that we're struggling with, and when we talk about, I think Emily had a really great point when you talked about how the conversation is harder. It's more work on the front end to talk through, well, this is why we're not going to pick up this stray dog. Have you done these things? All of that, it's harder. But for us at a municipal shelter that was still having to euthanize for space prior to COVID, the return on investment was absolutely worth it for us, right? So we have that. It's a lot harder to make that message clear for the nonprofit Humane Society, for the rescue groups that are limited intake. So for them, it's not a choice between euthanizing for space or having a tough conversation. For them, it's a choice between just saying, no, we're full, and doing nothing else, because that's what they do. So trying to get them to understand that collectively they need to be having those conversations too, even though their return on investment isn't going to be as great because the alternative isn't such a dramatic, it isn't death, right? So like, how do I get these nonprofits to say, I'm going to do the same thing you're doing. I'm going to have that conversation before taking in an animal too, because the more space that exists across the animal welfare network in your community, the better everybody is. So it can't just be the municipal shelter because we've got the most motivation to do it. It has to be everybody that's doing it. So that's a big thing that we're working on here is how do we share that messaging and how do we get more people buying in? Because if we're all rowing in the same direction, we're going to have better results. So that's one big piece of what we've been working on. And what we're doing to try to get there with them and with city leadership is data. I can't say enough about how much we've tried to use data in our operations. And so if you haven't done this in your community, I put together a presentation and we're getting ready to present to our city leadership about revised operations that we want to stay constant even post-COVID, whenever that, if ever that may come. But we actually we went into emergency intake only mode based on NACA recommendations March 13th. So we looked at the period of time directly before that, from a call for stray response, for bite calls, for dead animal pickup, for things like that. And then we compared that with our post-COVID numbers. And we have not only not seen a lack of an increase, but we've actually seen a decrease. We've seen almost a 30% reduction in stray calls. We've seen an 11% reduction in stray aggressives, a 13% reduction in bite calls, and 16% in dead animal pickup. So what does that tell us? Not necessarily a direct correlation to whether public safety is being put at risk, but certainly it tells us that having this alternate approach has not increased the public safety risk to our community, which allows us to say, hey, we're not doing anything bad, let us try this thing that might actually do some good. And I can tell you that we have not euthanized for space since March 12th, and I have told my team I'm going to lift every weight in my book and do everything in my power to make sure that March 12th, 2020 lives in infamy at Memphis Animal Services, and that is the last day we ever euthanize for space. And the way we're going to do that is by being committed to this effort, use the data, and then just push everybody. It has to be community-wide. So I encourage all of you guys, just please check out that data. And I would be happy, I know Chris posted something. If you guys would like to see the PowerPoint that we put together, I'd be happy to share it with anybody. Just shoot me an email. I'll put my email address in the comment box. So that's my success story, is that we are seeing the future where we don't all live in a state of panic and fear and dread of coming to work, of how many animals we might have to put to sleep that day. And that is the success to me of this, is that this might be the game changer our industry needed. So that's my 2 cents.
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
And I know there's been a lot of really great coalitions formed to kind of pull the shelters and the rescues in the community together to get on the same page. Because that's right, the rescues that aren't faced with those decisions every day are key players. And without their support, it makes it a whole lot harder for the shelter to save lives.
This is Becky. I work at Houston Pet Set in Houston. And we work with about 90 different animal welfare nonprofits in the area. And I know our rescues here, as the shelters have decreased the amount of intake, they've been feeling enormous pressure from both, people calling with stray animals and owners that are looking to surrender. So I know that they're feeling a lot of the pressure. Of course, they don't have the resources because, they rely on donations. And of course, those are down right now for a lot of organizations. So I think it's important to consider that, a lot of those rescues are doing the best that they can, but they do feel the pressure of knowing that if they say no to an animal, it could end up on the streets, or in some cases, dumped or what have you. We're seeing a lot of people finding a lot more animals that have been dumped onto the streets. So of course, Houston's already had a huge problem with that to begin with. So, and we are a little concerned here about how many of those animals aren't making it into foster homes or the shelters and are now out, potentially at risk on the streets, multiplying and things of that nature. So that is definitely something we're really concerned about, is, the whole animal welfare community tries to take this new direction.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand that. I appreciate that. So we're almost out of time. And one thing that we are always struggling with is, what is the important topics that you guys want to discuss? What's important to you? What are you struggling with internally? And it's hard sometimes for you to voice it. So I was wondering if in the chat, if you could write 1 or 2 topics that you really are struggling with internally that you would like some American Pets Alive assistance with, so that we could try to focus one of our summits on. We'd really be interested in being able to, bring you the platform that you want to listen to, not just us rambling about bottle baby Catahoula puppies or something. I don't know.
I do want to add real quick to Becky's statement because it's very true and it's something that we're all struggling. I think every community is struggling with that right now, and it's kind of, it feels like the tipping point between, do we allow the shelters to just go back to the old way because we're getting so much pushback? And I think one thing we have to be really good about reminding or saying to our community is this is not what it's going to look like forever. This is what it looks like right now because everybody in welfare is scrambling to get these resources in place that have never been there before, which isn't okay. You know, ideally these resources all already existed and we just fell back on them, but that's not the case. So what Lost and Found looks like right now is not what it's going to look like in next week or in 2 weeks or in a month or in 2 months. It's going to keep getting better and as the resources get put in place in our communities so that people aren't feeling like they have to keep that rowdy dog that's tearing up their backyard. There's going to be a resource for them. There's going to be foster on deck. There's going to be something in place so that they feel supported. And this is just that temporary growing pain while we're all scrambling to get those resources in place.
Well, thank
Does
you,
anybody
everyone.
have anything in closing that they want to discuss?
Anything extra?
Well, we really appreciate you spending an hour with us, especially on a Friday afternoon. When we scheduled all of these, we just didn't think about how Friday afternoon, you know, Mondays were definitely not a fun day, but you think about how Friday, it's the end of the week. So we appreciate you guys all being here and being so open and willing to communicate and talk about the difficult things. It's tough. It's a tough time right now all the way around. And so we really appreciate you coming in and just being open and honest and not, you know, jumping on each other and just having good open conversations. We really appreciate that. That's what we all need right now. We all need the support to move forward with what we're doing right now. And we look forward to seeing you next Friday at 3 p.m. too. And we'll start looking at all of the things that are being filled out for possible discussion.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Bye.